it's very normal to have those moments where you just don't want to keep going, but if the why is strong enough, you'll push through.
Go ahead and share with us what is your biggest piece of advice that you'd have that changed your life that somebody had told you in the past?
Yeah, it's really hard to pick one, but I think one of the best little nuggets I got was from Dr. Ron McCurdy. He used to run the Disneyland All American College Band, and it's do what you have to do what you want to do. And it's super simple and it's a really broad stroke, but I just love that. It just, for me, it helps me put things into perspective and focus on my goal and making sure that I'm doing what's necessary to reach whatever I'm trying to get to. Um, that phrase has helped me through a lot of times where I've, like, everybody has those moments where you don't want to go in the practice room, you don't want to do um, the dirty work, right? The long tones, the slurs, and being really focused and detail oriented with what you're doing. But um, just thinking like I need to do what I have to do what I want to do. Especially going into the audition that I won and where I'm at now, I knew the kind of lifestyle that I wanted to have. Um, so I always just like to be focused on moving towards whatever my end game is and making sure I'm taking the necessary steps to get there.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really um, inspiring quote. Do you mind sharing a little bit, like one of those, like the really nitty gritty that you kind of had to dive into? I know, like what you said. Sometimes just picking up the horn on some of the toughest days is a struggle, and sometimes it's just about the commitment to it. But do you have any examples from your journey?
Yeah, I remember thinking back in college, like there were times where like I didn't want to practice and like thought I was being lazy, but like it's a whole other level when you have a wife and kid too. Like so this these last the last 2 years. Well, actually, my son's about to turn 3, so yeah, for about the last 3 years now. I mean, it's just it's hard to balance life and your goals. Your priorities change, and a lot of my practice, uh, at least when I was in the Navy, stationed up by Seattle, was in a parking garage or my personal garage, excuse me, and it was cold. I had like a tiny little space heater, and that's all I had to like warm up like the 5 foot like circumference around me, and my left side was always cold. And I always had reasons not to practice, is kind of what I'm saying. I was always beat down. I usually didn't really get a great practice session until like after 6 or 7 p.m. Um, and yeah, there's definitely a lot of instances where yeah, it's I just didn't want to do it, but I knew the goal that I had. I knew the vision that I had for my family and the kind of life that we wanted to have. Um, and on some level, this making it in music's just difficult, and you have to accept that and roll with it instead of try to fight against it. So I just yeah, you just kind of do it. I mean, yeah, I mean it's very normal to have those moments where you just don't want to keep going, but if the why is strong enough, you'll push through.
Yeah. Cool, definitely. I think a lot of us can kind of actually relate to that with those circumstances, especially like nowadays. Like I feel like a lot of us, as we're aspiring musicians, are living in apartments or in not necessarily the best conditions, or if we're living in a large city or something, then we have those all those additional challenges on top of everything else. So it
Hmm.
always it's nice to hear somebody that's made it, hearing the same struggles. Um,
Hmm.
so if you could travel back in time, to your younger self and give your younger self one piece of advice, what do you think it would be?
Yeah, so I was particularly unrefined as a young adult. So just a little bit about my backstory. So I got into Sam Palafian's tuba studio at ASU. Did 2 years with him. He left for Miami. I did 2 years with Dr. Sabota, and at that point, I was way out of shape. I was like almost 300 pounds. I was failing school. I wasn't basically just all around. I was just failing at adulting and in almost every category across the board. Um, and I if I could go back to that person, um, I think I would make sure that I would just tell him, change is possible. I remember very distinctly I had this moment where I told myself I'm going to die at 50 because I'm just not the kind of person who's capable of changing. Which is ridiculous, right? Like when you're in your early 20s, you're nothing yet, right? Not to say like you're not, there's no value, but what I'm saying is you're not a finished product,
Yeah.
right? You can't put those labels on yourselves and those, parameters around like who you are because you're still figuring it out. And that's true for anybody at any stage in your life. One of the last lessons I had with Sam Palafian, he was in his 60s, and all he was talking about was how he was going to reinvent himself. He was going to do this new thing. He was going to start going on tour. He was going to start playing this instrument, write this kind of music, play this, play that. It was all over the place, and that was a really important moment for me, and I took that with me. And that's one of the things that really pushed me to change. Was like, well, if this guy who's in his 60s and is already accomplished more than I will ever hope to on the tuba, if he's thinking about reinventing himself and is capable of change and adapting, why why not me? Yeah, I think just change is possible. It's never too late to reinvent yourself. Is the biggest thing I would just try to push.
Cool. Yeah, and I really like that a lot. As somebody that I'm 25, so kind of living that life right now of putting myself in those boxes and just kind of always reminding myself of, hey, like this isn't the end. I'm not the end. I'm at the beginning of a career, not the end of it.
Hmm.
And just being able to take those risks, I think, is very very powerful, even if it makes you really uncomfortable while you're doing it.
Hmm.
Cool. Next question. So, if you had to choose, what would you consider your top favorite books?
So my number one is The Talent Code by Dan Coyle. Um, and honestly, I don't see how you could read that book and not start practicing more efficiently. Um, so yeah, it should be a required reading for anybody who's just trying to get better at something, whether it's music, golf, surgery, firefighting, whatever you're trying to get better at. That should be the first place that you turn to. And one of the biggest takeaways I get from it is just talking about how our nervous system works and how we create skill. If you're not familiar with it, um, uh, basically, if you want to think of your neurons in your nervous system as like little dots and they're interconnected by wires called axons, uh, any sort of motion is a combination of electricity going through neurons by way of those axons, right? Hopefully, you're
Mhm.
still tracking. And if the same uh, order of neurons are firing over and over again, these cells in your brain will wrap those axons in this insulation called myelin, which makes those electrical impulses go faster and more automatic, and that's your muscle memory. What can we get from that, right? It's that we want correct repetition of the desired motion as much as possible. That's how we practice, and that's how we get better, and that's how we get more consistent, and that's how we accomplish what we want. It's correct repetition. How do we guarantee correct repetition? Slow practice, right? We know that that works, but I feel like um, this is a paraphrase from a book about barbecue, but it's the first step, or excuse me, understanding how something works is the first step towards successfully replicating or improving upon something. um, I feel like understanding the how will help you uh, get to wherever you're trying to go, and develop whatever skills you're trying to develop.
Yeah.
Hmm.
No, it's definitely a great book. Highly recommend it as well. And what you brought up, the understanding the how. I feel like in just in education today, that's so important. Students.
Hmm.
So, like I said, I'm a high school band director, and students they don't just stick with the status quo anymore. They don't do the
Hmm.
things to do. They don't trust the process anymore. At least what's what I'm finding. So I've really had a lot of benefit from explaining the how and having
Hmm.
make sure like they understand what the how is, like why are we doing this and how do we need to do it, and then they understand the benefit. So that's definitely a great point there.
Hmm.
Um, cool. So you just recently won your job with Persian Zone in DC.
Hmm.
Um, what would you say is probably like one of your largest challenges that maybe you had to really overcome when you were on the track to winning that job?
I mean, there's a lot of challenges that you face when you audition. I mean, especially where I've been. So I've lived primarily on the West Coast, which, if you think about that for a second, that means anytime I've taken an audition, I've had to fly across an entire continent to potentially only play for 3 minutes and get told no, and then have to turn right back around and fly back. Right. So I mean,
Yeah.
I think just logistically, just being so physically far from where the auditions are happening was a challenge. Um, but musically, so I idolized Pat Sheridan, Sam Palafian, a lot. Like when I was younger, and those are two players who have just beautiful sounds, and they're instantly identifiable. Their goals when they play is to be captivating and to almost force you into having an opinion about the performance, which is a good thing. Um, but for me, I mean, I think I took a little too far when I was younger, and I auditioned more like a soloist than I did as like a potential employee, which is what you are, right? Like you're auditioning for a job at the end of the day. Um, and I mean, it's also just music maturity too. You have to know your role, and you have to make sure that the panel knows that you know how the music goes. Um, so for me, it was just making sure that I changed my thinking about what an audition was, um, and that I'm just well researched in what I'm doing, and that I'm presenting the music how it's supposed to go in a way that is musically compelling, yes, but is also something that the panel can listen and be like, yeah, I can play along with that, and it would feel awesome. So,
Cool. Yeah. What would you say, just since you're fresh off the circuit, if you had to choose, what's your favorite excerpt and why?
oh man, favorite one. I mean, I guess like one that I just know I play better than most people is
Mhm.
West Side Story. Um, and I've always loved the super technical stuff, and
Yeah.
that's such a difficult excerpt, and I practice it so much, and I could pull out my tuba now and play it for you, and it'd be fine. Like I just done so much
Mhm.
work on it, and I got it to a point where I was really proud of it. So I would say that one is probably my favorite to whip out.
Yeah, and I can agree with your statement because I've listened to your video of it. I don't even know how many times. It's just some really awesome playing. Um,
Yeah.
while we're here, least favorite, which one's the bane of your existence?
Oh yeah, that's a longer
All of
list.
them. Yeah.
Uh, God, which one? I would say honest. Okay, so one is this shows up on the Navy band auditions a lot, but late preludes.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think I hate it though. It's just it's such a difficult excerpt, and it's because it's a transcription, uh and it's one where you kind of change hats a little bit, like within the excerpt, and the key is being able to like show the panel that like what you're trying to emulate. So sometimes you're string bass, and sometimes you're woodwind, and sometimes you're a tuba player, right?
Yeah.
Your roles change, and you have to be really well researched, and it's also just a very technically demanding piece. um I've had to spend a lot of time on that one. Uh, which one do I? Oh yeah, First Suite,
Hmm.
the quiet one. Yeah, just that is one where like you can trick yourself into not practicing it, thinking that you got
Hmm.
it, and then when the audition comes, you know, you're feeling it. The soft, smooth connections of all the notes and all that stuff. That's an excerpt that I always made sure that I spent a ton of time on to make sure that I had it solid. Yeah, I would say that one for sure was the bane of my existence.
Yeah.
And one of the
No.
things technically I had to really work on, especially in the last few years going up to the audition that I won, was just flexibility. Just making
Mm.
that was something that I got to a point where I was like, all right, I'm gonna actually get good at this, and like so. I mean, it's kind of like one of those things that's in the back of your head, like where you're used to not being great at it, so you kind of
Mhm.
trick yourself into like bracing for some of those leaps and whatnot.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that I had to do with that was just to untrain myself from bracing myself and making sure that my air was smooth and that I wasn't expecting it to go wrong. I
Mhm.
think a lot of times we play expecting some things to not happen correctly, which is that's not the headspace you want to be at. So I had to spend a lot of time working to like focus on what I was trying to accomplish and not being afraid of what could go wrong, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Cool. Definitely. Cool. So, for most of us tool players out there, you're living the dream. So can you describe a typical day? Just kind of what you go through with DC?
Yeah, sure. So I'm in the ceremonial band. So I mostly do funeral services in Arlington National Cemetery, and my main axe is a plastic sousaphone. That's what I use most of the time. Which, um, it's you're playing with the best musicians in the country, and it doesn't matter if you're in a concert hall or outside in 30 degrees. I mean, it's your job is to be a compelling musician and to um, you know what what's the goal of any musician is to have impact, right? And
Mm.
what's if you've never seen or witnessed a full honors funeral, there are very few musical moments that are more impactful than that. Um, and to be able to be part of that is really special. So anyways, yeah, a normal day, I mean, funerals will happen anytime from like 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Um, and it really depends on the time of the year. From what I understand, summers are really busy. I just missed that rush, so right now our schedule's letting up a little bit. Um, so a normal day, the schedule will come out probably like a week before. It'll be a tentative schedule, and it'll kind of firm up as things get closer to whatever day it is. Um, you get the funeral services that you're on. You go in, make sure your uniform looks good. And then what I like to do, I usually get about like 45 minutes of a basics routine in every morning. That's just my happy place. Um, just hold over from when I was studying with Sam. We used to do an hour and a half of basics every morning. And I just love waking up and getting a solid fundamentals routine in. Um, so I'll do that. And then, yeah, we meet up and it depends on what kind of service it is. Sometimes it means that we're marching upwards of a mile or more into Arlington um, to the burial site, and sometimes we'll get bussed over there. It just kind of depends on the kind of service that happens. But regardless, yeah, you just do the jobs that you're on, and if you're not doing a job, you can go to the gym and work out. You can do whatever appointments you have to do. You can do personal practice time. Or in my case, which has been really great with a pregnant wife who's due in about 3 weeks, is I get to go home and uh, you know take the toddler away from her so she can catch a break. So that's been really
Yeah.
nice. um yeah, I mean, it's I think we all have this finish line uh attitude towards winning an audition, right? It's like that's the end, right? There's a happily ever after. But I experienced this to an extent, even when I got into the Navy band that I was in. You know you, it's just a new start, so this is kind of a new place for me to start from ground zero and
Mhm.
begin whatever personal or musical journey that I want to go on. Um, so I'm excited right now. Just I have a lot of ideas kind of like running around in my head of things and projects that I want to do, um, which will probably have to wait until after baby's born and after my wife finishes her studies and whatnot. But I mean, it's exciting to have a new beginning and not necessarily be at a finish line and at an ending, because at least for me personally, I don't like the idea of just kind of coasting into the sunset. Like I want to keep developing myself, and there's still, I spend a lot of time around really good tuba players, and I know what the limits are, and I don't feel like I'm anywhere close. So
Mhm. Cool.
yeah.
So, what do you believe? Talking about the limits. What do you believe is the most important skill? And I know there's a lot of them, but like really dialed in, the most important skill a tuba player should have. And with that, what is your advice for improving upon it?
I think just the most important skill as a musician is your mindset.
Mm.
What's your goal while you're playing? And I think a lot of us get into like the technical aspects of playing, or just but it's really about like, are you interesting to listen to? And when people listen to you, do they feel something? That's what makes us our money, right? That's what keeps the lights on in every music school and every orchestra and any musical organization. Is how impactful are you when people listen to you? Um, and the best thing you can do is listen to great music. That's the most natural way that humans learn is by imitation. Um, so if you have great input, it will affect your output. If you always have great things going into your ear holes, um, it will influence the way that you sound. So just yeah, listen to great music. And if you're a tuba player, don't only listen to tuba players. Um, this might be a news flash, but not all tuba players are great at playing melodies. Like you might have to outsource that one. If you're trying to get better at soloing, listen to cellists, listen to vocalists, listen to people who make their living phrasing. Um, just have great influences. And if you're auditioning, yeah, listen to the great tuba masters. Listen to Mike Roylance or Chris Olka or Sam Palafian or whoever, right? Whoever inspires you. So
Yeah, cool. Yeah, one of my mentors told me this one time, and it stuck with me, that you're the mixture of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
mm-hmm.
So like if you're spying for greatness, then you need to find people that are doing the thing that you want to be doing and spend time with them. Or if you're around people that complain all the time, then you start becoming that same person and you have that outlook on life. And I really think it was quite special that you mentioned that. Because going in my head first, we're always thinking about the skills on the tuba. But
Mm-hmm.
you stepped away from the tuba completely and you said mindset. And I think that's just a really solid approach and a really
Mm-hmm.
humble approach to it too, as somebody that's had the journey that you've had, where you just understand that it's you can make your skills better each and every day and you can take them as far as you can, but having that mindset really locked in,
Right.
and it really helps. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, especially, I mean, and even with auditioning, I was talking before about, how I was like really cavalier about being compelling and all that stuff, and how I don't want people to think that was like a detriment in my auditioning. Um, Basically, my big issue is that I wasn't well informed enough about how the music was supposed to go. I mean, think about the life of somebody who's sitting on a panel. You're listening to dozens of tuba players coming in and trying to play it correctly, and then that person comes in and tells you a story,
Mhm.
right? Like, what's that going to do? That's going to be like, wow. It's like, think of a great performance that you've been in, or excuse me, that you've watched or listened to. You know, a great performance, as an audience member, you're not worried about the performer, right? They are in charge of your consciousness for that moment of time, and it feels good to hand that over to the performer, right? So
Mhm.
if you can give that judging panel that gift of a musical performance, that will set you apart. Of course, I mean, these aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, great time, great sound, great intonation, that's musical. That is part of being musical. Um, that's not robotic playing. That's just doing what you're supposed to do as a musician. That aids the musical message that you have. So
Cool. Well, Mark, we're going to wrap up here soon. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Any other last words of wisdom or piece of advice for our listeners out here today?
I just know what you want to do and make a plan. Be organized, but also be nice to yourself. Right, be solution oriented in your practice. Right, if you're chasing an audition, it's a very slippery slope to become negative with yourself and to be just downright mean with yourself. Uh, the most important studio professor you'll ever have is yourself. You are your teacher. You are the one that you spend the most time with. And why would you want to spend time with someone who's mean to you? Right. So make sure that your self talk is productive, that it's solution oriented, and that it's steady. Right. It's not too high, not too low. It's driven towards whatever goal that you're going towards.